Vice
Thank you.
Chair.
You're heard. I'm listening. We're all listening. And I have some questions for you, Mr. Herrick. So thank you for your comments. I'd like to hear your thoughts on other alternatives. I know you're talking about 5A, but, shifting the burden, but you're also talking about the San Joaquin and some existing requirements. And so just for further clarity, could you focus on 5A and the issue of protecting stored water when it's released to meet water quality standards? I think what we're trying to do, we talked about this earlier, whether it's through this process or another process, really looking for creative ways to reduce TUCPs and to protect stored water and make sure folks aren't picking up water that they shouldn't be picking up. And I know you've been very instrumental in some of the voluntary programs in the Delta to address some of these issues. So just wanted to give you a little more opportunity to talk about 5A.
I appreciate that. And this may be a roundabout answer. But number one, it's important to note that TUCPs should be granted or can be granted if the petitioner, the permit holder, has exercised due diligence to effectuate what needs to be done without the need of an emergency or urgency proceeding. I hope everybody appreciates the irony of the state board adopting a water quality control plan which anticipates TUCPs, and then somebody comes before them later and says, you know, we couldn't provide for this drought, so would you please give us emergency relief? This is the due diligence. So we either develop a method whereby we meet the standards on a regular basis, or you change the standards, that's up to you during drought times. But you don't just ignore, you're not ignoring it, but you don't just move forward and have the emergency thing decided at the last minute. That's why we're doing this. Now, the problem with the system is, I hate to tell people this, but it doesn't work. What needs to happen is the board, because the Bureau and DWR is not going to do it, or if they've done it, they're not going to release it. The board needs to do a analysis to determine what water needs to be kept in a reservoir so that the projects have enough water to meet the future year's demand for fishery obligations and cold water stuff like that. If it's you just go through historical records, so it's a critical dry, whatever dry it is here, and then you see how much that is, and then you do for 2 years to see what that is, and maybe 3 years, and you look at that information, and you're going to see that the system doesn't work. So in other words, the reason we operate under TUCPs and the reason we need other people to share in the Bureau and DWR's statutorily mandated burden is that we built these systems that don't work. The system doesn't have the ability to hold enough water to meet a multi-year drought. There's no solution to that. You guys can't regulate more water being available unless you take it away from other users, which is what the proposal is now. So what you should do is that calculation, and then you should send that in an official letter to the governor and the legislature. Not that I have any hope that the legislature would do anything cogent, but you need to put that to them, say, the people who are charged with meeting fishery obligations in a situation where the estuary is being destroyed, it won't work. You can hold all the water you want, and then after a year, there's zero exports, or 2 years, whatever it is, there's zero exports. That's what you need to put to it, because the other people who are in charge of making policy and the laws need to address that. Now, sorry, I lost my train of thought in my lunacy here. But the notion that the people who are charged with meeting the statutory obligations and regulatory obligations also export in times when they have to get TUCPs, in my view, is unsupportable. Now, there are some drought years in the past that we just went through in the last, 10, 15 years. There were times when 1 million or 2 million acre feet of water was exported in the first half of the water year, and then we had TUCPs in the second half of the water year. That's not how the system works. Racanelli and the Delta Protection Act both say you can export water if you meet your salinity, your outflow requirements, your salinity repulsion, you provide water for in-delta use, mitigate your fishery impacts, then you can export. And unfortunately, excuse me for being blunt, the state board has ignored that requirement, state requirement and law requirement and case law requirement, sorry. And so we've had 1 to 2 million acre feet of exports during a year with TUCPs. And then during the TUCP, they get to export 1,500 CFS. Now, the theory was for 15 years, 20 years, right? That was for health and safety for cities. And then the Bureau and DWR had to admit in public, no, that 1,500 CFS wasn't to do that. That was to make sure the canals don't dry up and crack. The canals drying up and crack is not a basis for ignoring case and state law. And so that's my roundabout answer to the TUCP problem, which is we have to look at what amount of water is necessary to be held over in the reservoirs that are charged with the responsibility, not other people, but those reservoirs, and figure out what the magnitude of the problem is. And then somebody else has to make that decision. I get the question all the time from Southern Valley farmers, which I don't try to view as the enemy, but view me as the enemy. And they say, well, Mr. Herrick, where are you going to get 5 million acre feet for us? And I said, there isn't 5 million acre feet for you. If you're going to meet your obligations, there's not 5 million acre feet for water south of me. There isn't. So we have to address that head on, and hopefully we could have a process that tries to come up with some reasonable thing. Now, I fully understand the South Delta Water Agency has zero political power. So if the legislature then undertakes the decision to address who's responsible for what and how and when, I'm going to lose. But I'd rather lose because the rules are changed than to lose because the rules are not applied. We need to follow the rules, including things like mandates you put in the 2018 amendment that require studies and a studies plan and an operations plan due 18 months after the amendment goes to the Office of Administrative Law, which was what, 6 years ago. Sorry.
Don't be sorry in the least. Appreciate the comments, Mr. Herrick. Appreciate the question, Vice Chair.